Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Activities for People Living at Home with Dementia. We are proud to offer this series with funding from the Area Agency on Aging and the United Way of Tarrant County. These programs are recorded and are made available for viewing through a YouTube channel for future use. I am your host for today's activities. Peggy Spear is with us from the Amon Carter Museum of American Art. Peggy is bringing art which depicts Labor Day. Take it away, Peggy.
Right. Yeah, I cannot believe today is the start of September.
No.
The fastest summer I can remember in a really long time. So with Labor Day this weekend, thought we would look at some images in our collection that depict what we will be remembering. This is one of those things that kind of surprised me. We had such a large selection of images surrounding this idea of laborers and unions and workers. So we'll go kind of through. Most of them are works on, none of them are painting that we're looking at. It's all works on paper or photographs. So we've spent time with this particular artist, Louis Wicks-Hines, in different capacities in the past, usually documenting the same thing. And here we're looking at a 13-year-old boy working at a lumber mill in Orange, Texas. I mean, what just like jumps out at you is like, oh my God, this is awful.
A 13-year-old. Oh my word, that's young.
And barefoot.
Barefoot.
Oh my word.
Bill, that was immediately what jumped out at me when I saw this photograph. Like, okay, not only is this, he's working outside in Texas. I mean, it's November, so it's not ungodly hot, but you know, they're working year round. But he doesn't have shoes on.
No.
And so in this particular photograph, the Library of Congress has all of Hines' photographs, and they were all for the taken for the National Child Labor Committee when trying to create child labor laws in the early 1900s. And so the note that came with this particular, we have this photograph in our collection as well, but the government has the archives of it. And the caption is, Texas sawmill child labor lumber industry. And it said that he was sorting lumber. And then under it, it says, exposed to all kinds of weather, picking slabs from chutes with heavy moving chain that carries up wood, would only make $5 a week.
My word.
Could you imagine?
No.
My father made 50 cents a day when he was born in 1918. So for this young man to make $5 a week before my dad was even born was a pretty good wage. Isn't that a shock?
Yeah. I mean, and I'm sure he was walking to where he was working. So his day probably started before the sun even came up, walking then to work, outside the entire day, standing with no shoes on, and then probably leaving when the sun was close to dusk and walking home. I mean, what a day.
Oh, yeah.
And they're not covered. They're not in any sort of area protecting them from the elements. So you don't know what would a rainy day look like. But this was all, this particular photographer used his camera for social reform. And so he was really committed to exposing basically the horror that was child labor in the United States. And Texas was one of those states where he did a lot of his documenting. So we've seen in the past, the cotton workers, little children picking cotton in West Texas. This was in Orange, Texas for Link Lumber Company. And so this was one of those, it's a beautiful image, but depicting a sad reality. So this is, whenever you talk about child labor reform or child labor laws, like always linked to this artist because he's really what spearheaded the movement.
Peggy, is he barefoot?
Totally barefoot.
Okay.
I mean,
Okay,
and like all of these little, think of just the splinters, not even things dropping on him, just the splinters he might be getting.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Peggy
Oh, there's little
has something to
fingers.
say.
Say that again.
Philip was wanting to say something.
Oh, go ahead.
You know, my grandfather was on his own from when he was 12 years old. And he told me a story about when he first went off on his own, he was in Kansas City and he got a job unloading grain from boxcars for 5 cents a day. And it was like shoveling grain all day. And he had another kid with him about the same age, and they got talking, and this kid said to him, he says, you know, this is hard work. He says, you know, I can dance. He said, can you whistle? And they both at that point in time quit their job unloading boxcars and went downtown Kansas City on a street corner. And the boy danced and my granddad whistled, and he said, we made more in an hour than we could have made in 2 weeks unloading boxcars.
Oh, wow.
I love that.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
How resourceful.
Mhm. Yeah, resourceful is right.
Well, I don't think this kid was tap dancing to anything interesting because here he is at his lumber yard. So we're gonna move now to a different photograph of an adult, not a child, by an artist named Charles River. So the title tells you a lot. Jack tightening a bolt on the line holding the derrick on the Chrysler building.
Mhm.
Oh, word.
So what do we think?
I wouldn't like to be up there.
Nope.
He's only tied on with a little
Looks
rope or
dangerous.
chain.
Mhm.
Yeah. Ooh, what a balancing act.
Mhm. Is that from the same guy who has that picture where they sit like on a beam and eat?
You know what? I don't know, but that photographer was an amateur photographer, this one, and he took his camera in his lunch pail and would take pictures during his lunch break. So
Oh.
if it's not the same person, they were of the same mindset.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, he would, this particular photographer was a labor worker and an activist and a photographer. And so he would, he was really interested in photographing history as it was happening. And while he photographed Empire, he worked on the Empire State Building as a bolt driller, as was his job. And then I'm not exactly sure what he did at the Chrysler Building, but he worked on both, and he was photographing the construction of these because at the time they were the tallest buildings in the world. And so he knew he was working on something that was really kind of wonderful. And so he was interested in photographing those moments, but he was also really interested in labor organization and being an activist for the rights and protection for those labor workers. So this is a pretty artistic photograph.
It is
Mhm.
well balanced.
Yeah,
It's like a silhouette for some part, most of it.
it does. It has that, it feels very black and white. I mean, you can see some shadowing here. But you get a sense of this like almost heroic feeling that this man is, as Yetta pointed out, balancing on what would have been the tallest building, balancing and putting together something that was much larger than himself.
Peggy, I looked up the skyscraper photograph. It was
Mhm.
taken in 1932 by Charles Ebbets, Ebbets.
Oh, interesting.
And it
Okay.
says New York lunch atop a skyscraper, but it doesn't say which one.
So in the late 1920s, early 1930s was the skyscraper boom in New York. Yeah,
That's one.
was the skyscraper boom in New York City. And
Yes.
People were, and you could buy smaller cameras. Cameras
Mhm.
had become more available for anybody to buy, not just the professional photographer, and more compact. So there was the flexibility of taking photographs where you're not dragging glass plates and you don't have a donkey with all the stuff hanging off it. So it really opened up the world of photography when cameras became a little more portable. But here it just, I mean, this feels a little more artistic than the picture Yetta and Martha brought up of like the guys at their work break. This has a grace and elegance to it that really does make it feel like fine art photography. What are people's thoughts? Did anyone do construction? Has anyone worked in construction before? Or
Yep.
Philip did. Philip did.
what was your specialty?
My dad was a stonemason and bricklayer. When I turned 16, he got me on the jobs with him, and I was basically a laborer. I would push a wheelbarrow and full of bricks up to where he was, or mix mortar. And
Were you a hod carrier?
Were you what?
I actually got to work with him on a job at US Steel, where he was relining blast furnaces.
Wow.
And I got the privilege of sitting in a bosun's chair and being dropped inside the blast furnace with a jackhammer to crack out the old fire brick in there that were damaged.
Oh, wow.
I came out of that summer of work looking like a piece of beef jerky. I didn't have an ounce of fat on me. They never put the fires completely out in the blast furnaces. So when they just banked them as low as they could get it, and they would drop you in there, and we would go in. It was like 15 minutes at a time. You go in for 15 minutes and come out for 45. And when I went to work, I was wearing long underwear and jeans and two shirts and a sweatshirt, everything, just keep the heat off my body, you know?
Yeah.
And
Mm,
like I say, I was like a piece of beef jerky at the end of that summer.
I take my hat off to you, Phil.
Yes.
My
What age were
goodness.
you, Philip? What age were you? 13?
I was 17, I think, when I was doing that.
7.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
Wow.
I grew up in Lubbock, Texas. He grew up in Chicago. Very big difference.
That is,
Yes, there is.
He grew up in a big city, and Lubbock was like, country.
Did we have any, did we have any,
Hills everywhere.
did we have any blast furnaces in Texas back then?
Blast furnaces?
I don't know
Not
whether they
that
do or not.
I-
Well, I don't know. I don't know if there's any real steel production in Texas.
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
I think they had blast furnaces at one point to power electrical stations, but they would take the water from the lake and steam it up and run the turbines,
Yeah, steam generators.
steam generators. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're at the scale of what a steel furnace is.
Not as far as for heat, I don't think. I've worked with some steam generators before, and most of them are steam generation plants. And there's two styles. One is actually a open system and one is a closed system.
Okay.
The one I worked with actually had a cooling tower, so it'd come in and it'd heat up. The steam would go through the generator part and then go into a cooling tower, to cool down again, and then go back into the boiler. So it just kept going,
Yeah.
but it would lose, of course, you lose water all the time,
Oh,
you
yeah.
keep replenishing, but and that was kind of a neat one because it was actually at a paper mill that was down in our community, and I could take my kids down there, my electronics kids down there, and they do tours of the generation plant because they purchased power because it gotten so big, but they also had their own generator plant. And it was kind of fun to take them down there, and they talked about it, go through, and they'd see it, but they'd sit them down and do some theory classes with them too about all the things that they go through. And it was kind of neat.
So where'd you grow up?
Well, I grew up in North Dakota, but this was in North Carolina.
North Dakota and North Carolina.
Yeah, yeah. This was in Brevard, North Carolina, at a Coosa paper mill.
Yeah.
And they basically made Bible paper and cigarette paper. That's
Bible
what it's
paper and
special.
cigarette.
Really?
Yeah, because it's the same. Bible paper and cigarette paper is the same.
Huh.
Really?
Okay, just cut differently.
I have a kind of wild story about cigarette paper. I have a love for cigarette paper that I never knew I would have. About 3 years ago, I was asleep and a roach crawled into my ear and destroyed my eardrum.
Oh, no.
And yeah, it was a terrible thing. That went to the ER. They didn't see the roach. So it stayed in my head for 5 days
Oh, my.
Oh,
before I went to the ENT because I was getting I felt like an inner ear infection.
Yeah.
The bug died about 7 hours after being in my head. But then it didn't
Oh, no.
So anyway, so the doctor took the bug out and saw the damage to my eardrum. And I was pregnant at the time, so there was about nothing they could do to fix it because of being pregnant, except get cigarette paper and cut the edges because it had started to heal on its own, but it was such a big hole, it wasn't going to heal on it together. So she cut the edges and then cut the tiniest circle of cigarette paper. She ran down to the 7-Eleven in the hospital, got it, and put the cigarette paper on my eardrum. And we had to do it about 4 times because then the skin started growing, was able to grow across. And the cigarette paper is what healed my eardrum.
That's interesting.
oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's
Amazing.
cool. Yeah.
It was the coolest thing. And she told me, she said, when you're in delivery, when you're pushing, you're probably going to blow the paper out of your eardrum. And I did. And I could hear that whistling. And I was like, I need the ENT back in here now. Like, we've got a lot of situations happening with the body. Like, we need the ear, we need a baby. And so anyway, like a week later, she then ended up putting the more paper back in my ear, and it healed perfectly, and my hearing restored and everything. So
Good.
cigarette paper is a godsend.
Hallelujah.
Yeah, they would use it for those who are working with audio speakers. If they had a hole punctured in the cone, they'd use cigarette paper to glue on there to make it so that it wouldn't rattle.
Well, they use it for the tiniest little
Yep.
eardrums as well.
Yeah.
Peggy, that's a wonderful story.
It is, absolutely.
It was one of those things that the bug was, honest to God, it was about an inch big.
Oh,
It was a nightmare. It was a total nightmare. So anyway, all right, moving on to our next artwork.
Follow that.
Yeah, right. Perfect segue. So we were just looking at artworks that kind of celebrated the importance of the worker. Now we're going to look at a couple of artworks that really focus on the importance of strike and the importance of union or whatever to protect these workers. And this was a very popular theme in a lot of our photographs of documenting these rallies, these protests that these labor and union workers would organize. So protest rally, Cadillac Square, Detroit. Any guesses on what industry this might be?
Car.
Car.
Yeah, this is Chrysler. This is Chrysler factory protest.
That's a lot of people.
It is a lot of people. They are protesting. It was a United Automotive Workers
Hello, America. Yeah.
Assembly protest, and they were striking against Chrysler's institution of higher production speeds.
Huh.
So you can see it hard to read some of
Yeah.
the pickets, but you
Yeah.
can see there are all, they're heavily towards the front, but there are a bunch of different handmade signs that these workers are holding.
Yeah,
In the top-
probably they were protesting it because they're asking them to produce more and getting paid less.
Yes.
It's interesting, in the top left corner, there's a car with sound truck. It's a sound truck.
The
Yeah,
sound truck, yeah.
yeah.
There's actually a couple of them up there. The very top,
Yeah.
Oh, there's another one.
This is
Yeah.
part of a podium, I believe.
Oh, it's on a pole.
Yeah.
What is he?
okay,
And I think these people might be standing on a car.
yeah,
But yeah, this is in a square, a large area, and this vantage point is called Bird's Eye View.
That's
So you all know.
open look like a crash.
But this particular vantage point, I think is a really interesting one, and our historians would say, it is an interesting one. What does this point of view
No.
do to the cause, or what is it? How does it register differently than if the photographer were standing on the same level with these protesters?
Oh,
Say it again.
You wouldn't see all the people if he was at the same level.
Right.
it shows a concentration of people there in a way that shows it was a big rally that had serious business to attend to.
Yeah, you see just the sheer size of number of people who felt that this was something they needed to go to. But you get the sense that you don't know who any of these people are. It's almost an abstraction. You don't know anybody. You see the power in number. So there's this. You feel the sympathy towards the worker, or you feel like, oh man, like they're shelling out in droves. I want to document this. But then you can kind of see it from what the people who were making the decisions, almost how they viewed these people. There are no faces. They're just bodies. They almost look like worker ants.
Mm-hmm.
And we're so far removed from what we are deciding and what they're doing, and not our problem up here. So it's an interesting, and there was this time in photography, different vantage points were viewed as radical, and vantage points that where you're on the same plane were kind of viewed as bourgeois and boring.
Huh.
So using this different vantage point, kind of was speaking to, okay, yes, I'm doing something as an artist that's radical, but then these people that I'm documenting are also doing something that's pretty cool and different too. And so the artist was kind of interested in this idea of maybe not so much whatever they were protesting, but the idea that they can protest, and that this is a right you have as a worker, as a union worker, to show your dissatisfaction. But this is a tool you can use, just like the vantage point is a tool you can use. You're seeing different political points of view, different artistic points of view. It's really kind of a powerful picture.
Yeah.
Have any of you attended a strike or created pickets for a strike? Has any of you been an activist in that way? You have, Martha?
No.
I picketed Southwestern Bell in the 1970s in August, and it was hotter than $2 bill.
How long did your picket last?
We took turns, but it was about 4 weeks.
Oh, wow.
It was a big strike.
Yeah.
I hated the union. I did not want to belong, but I would have been ostracized if I hadn't joined it. I was forced to.
Yeah.
My brother felt the same way. He was with AT&T,
Yeah.
and then with can't remember what it, when it changed to one of the bells. I can't remember what it was, but
The
you
split.
know, yeah, he said, you know, he essentially had to be part of the union,
Yes,
you know.
yes.
Um,
They'll blackball you from
yeah,
activities and friendships and parking spaces and
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
times and all that if you're not.
I remember,
Go ahead.
I remember working at General Dynamics when I first came down here. And there was they had one big strike, but since I was working for the man directly, I was not allowed to be in a union.
Mhm,
So,
mhm.
so we had to drive through the lines. And there are people all over the sides of the roads, and it was a big mess.
Right,
Management had to do the hard jobs then, didn't you,
Right.
John?
Yeah,
I remember when working for GTE when the IBEW was getting ready to go on strike. And we all had to train for a job that we would take when the hourly workers went out on strike. You know?
Mhm. Yes. What
And
did you train?
I remember my boss at the time bought a baby grand piano with the overtime money he made during the strike.
What did you?
Oh, go ahead.
What did you
Well-
train to do, Phil?
Do what? What's the question?
Phil, what did you train to do?
Well, I was in internal audit at that time, and what we did was we had to provide security for the switching offices
Ah,
so that you know the radical strikers could not break in and damage the equipment.
Folks, I'm sorry I came in late, but I gotta leave too.
all right.
bye, Steve.
So
There's
see you
Steve.
tomorrow.
Kiss the baby. See you tomorrow.
All right, bye-bye.
You know, when I was working at General Dynamics, they did not train me to do anything else. Number one, because I don't think I was qualified to do anything else. But they just left me doing engineering work, and that was important to them also.
Sure.
Yeah.
General Dynamics is where you worked?
That's where I worked when I first came down here.
Oh, really?
We lived like 2 miles off the end of the runway there at Carswell. We get a wake up call from B-52s taking off about
Yeah.
6:30 every morning.
Wow.
Sure, that was your wake-up call.
Yeah.
You know, as I told you, I grew up in South Chicago, and most of the people, well, a fairly large amount of the people that lived in my neighborhood worked for United States Steel, U.S. Steel South Works in Chicago. And they would go on strike every 3 years. But the 3 years that they were not on strike, they would save every penny they could possibly save so that they could survive the period of time that they were out on strike.
Yeah.
It's just,
Getting paid.
you know, it was just incredible that they never seemed to get ahead because they'd go on strike and spend all the money that they'd saved to just survive.
Yeah.
Mhm.
When I lived in Rome, the transport workers would constantly go on strike. I mean, it was like almost part of their job to go on strike. Like once a week, there was some sort of strike. The train, the buses. That is why Italians are always late, because nobody is running the transportation. So you would just get there and like not, there was always strikes, but their strikes were not like picketing or how they, at least those strikes weren't. They would just be like in a coffee shop. It was just, you know, it was like the most relaxing strikes you'd ever, and then meanwhile, every Italian is getting where they're going. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind striking if I were a labor worker there.
Peggy, I need to give you an observation about this strike picture.
Mhm.
It looked a little bit like either a bee colony or the inside of a flower.
Oh, the inside of a flower. Okay.
The little bitty things
Explain.
like a sunflower center.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
How little we are thought of.
Mhm. Yeah, and everyone's the same.
Yes. Thank you for letting me interject. that.
No, I'm so glad you said that. This is a different depiction. We're on the same same footing as the action by an artist, Carl Maidens, and it's titled A Union Organizer Works the Crowd on Wall Street.
Okay.
Wall Street looks skinny.
She looks skinny.
Wall Street looks
Oh, Wall
skinny.
Street, yeah.
It
This
is.
is on, I have the exact Cross Street. Let me find it. It is on Wall and Broad Street.
I'm proud of her for standing on that platform. She's the only woman.
That's what I was just noticing.
Yeah, and what's interesting is different museums have this artwork, and some of them have it titled "A Pioneer Organizer of the Office Workers Union." So you'd think you would see either all women because they're typists and secretaries, or you would see all men because they're office workers. So it's interesting to see her leading the group, but with a whole group of white men.
Yeah.
So I
Do you-
don't know more. I want to know more about it, but I couldn't find more.
Peggy.
What does that mean when she says after 8 years in the curb?
I couldn't find that out.
You couldn't find that out. You don't have it, sir.
So this particular photograph was taken for Time magazine. No, excuse me, Life magazine. This particular artist, photographer, was one of the 4 photographers that started Life magazine.
Oh, wow.
And this was the first year Life magazine rolled out, 1936. And so he was particularly interested in journalistic work that was capturing social reform and activism. So this is that. And he worked for Stryker, the photographer, the man who worked for the Standard Oil Company. He did photographs for him. We talked about how important Stryker was with commissioning photographers. So I couldn't find the article that was linked to this particular Life photograph. So I'm sure there is more to it, but I didn't have enough time to do more digging to find more about it.
Lots of history there.
You know, I really like the perspective of the narrow going down
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
and the shadows that it creates.
For it being a journalistic photograph, it's very artistic.
Yes,
And the lighting,
yes,
I mean, it feels like their faces are actually lit, whereas when you look at this,
that's right.
I mean, you can't tell anyone's face apart. I mean, granted, we are further away, but their faces are recognizable. So there feels to be, if this were a magazine that you were seeing this in, there's more of an immediacy to it because you might know somebody who's, demonstrating, or you might actually know somebody in the picture, or you can kind of see yourself like, oh, those look like the guys I work with. Yeah. Maybe we, unionize, or, this is something we should think about, or whatever.
Those are the hats my father wore up until the mid-50s.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they all look like they're shopping at the same hat store.
They do, don't they?
So we got 2 more. I know we're over time, but I'm just going to show you 2 quick ones that I found in our collection specifically for Labor Day by a cartoonist, Harold Maples. And he was a cartoonist for decades for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. And so we have a couple of his little comics cartoons in our collection. And this is specifically about Labor Day. What's in a name?
Mm-hmm.
So you see a medic thinking, oh, Texas highway deaths? Nope, they're going to be the lake deaths. A real for the Labor Day weekend.
Mm-hmm.
So his commentary on that, and another upbeat comic or cartoon
Ooh.
of the Grim Reaper crossing out Labor Day and calling it Murder Day, and listing all the different ways people die on Labor Day weekend.
Oh, yeah.
That's a messy vehicle down there too.
yes, it is.
Yeah.
That's 2 vehicles, isn't it?
Nate, yeah.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
Mhm.
One on top.
Yeah. So I'm gonna send you out in the world with these real happy notes.
Thank you, Peggy.
Yeah, you know. So if you're on the water, wear a life vest. If you're in the car, buckle up. If you're traveling anywhere this weekend for Labor Day.
And don't speed.
Yeah, don't speed, don't drink and drive, just, 2 and 10 on the wheel. And then you won't be one of these statistics the Grim Reaper is showing us.
Thank you, Peggy.
Of course, I will be back next week with you all, and the theme is buses, like Martha had talked about in the past. So we'll be looking at those rides.
Yes, thank you, dear.
All right.
Thank you,
guys. Have a
Peggy.
good long weekend. I'll talk
Bye,
to you.
Peggy. Thank you.
Bye.
You be safe too.
Thank you.
Yes, let's see what's coming up. Peggy Spear and Labor Day, and tomorrow is Nia Moving to Heal with Emily Corbin. She will stretch us out a little bit and make us a little healthier, right?
That's right.
Probably so, yeah.
That's what we like to see.